Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. I hope you're enjoying your short term pain because, believe me, some long term gain is just around the corner. We just need your initial investment of $1,000 today, $1,000 tomorrow, your enlistment in the Marine Expeditionary Force to clear the Strait of Hormuz, and whatever else we demand for you. Because once we get through that short term pain, once we get over that hill, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, I've been assured of all of this will have riches beyond your wildest dreams.
Yeah.
America will be so back, our demographics fixed, our border sealed, illegals deported, uh, no income tax. I think that's one of the other ones he was on.
Oh yeah, that's
So,
and Greenland.
oh yeah,
Greenland.
how could I forget Greenland? And we're finally
Well,
gonna
it's
have
going to
the
be called
Venezuela.
Red, Red, and Blue Land.
So true. Right in time for America 250. And we're also going to have that Venezuelan oil back online in just 3 months' time. It's not going to be a year's turnaround. And when we win, the Iranian oil, despite the damage, that's going to be back online. The Saudi oil is going to be back online. China is reeling from its loss of energy, but believe me, Japan and South Korea, who also get oil from Iran and the Gulf states, they're doing just fine. Not
And
affected
then
by this at all. Because you
yeah.
know why? Because they're on America's side.
Yeah, that's right. Just don't
And
drive.
you can overturn material reality if you're just on America's side. Maybe we were wrong about the neoconservatives being Trotskyists. They don't seem very materialistic in that sense. Where I don't know, it feels like a more I don't know the word for it, but a more fervent belief in the ability to bend reality to your will than I would expect from somebody with Marxist roots. But what do I know? But I suppose we do technically have serious news to talk about. So,
We do,
shall we
we
start
do.
where we
Yeah.
always start?
Yes, with those blasted maps. Yeah. So and we'll immediately follow the maps with some news in the Ukraine war. There was an attack of course, in Bryansk and on Donetsk. Eight medical, well, doctors and medical emergency workers were killed in Donetsk by the Ukrainians, with, of course, the help of the British, because they gave them a new batch of storm shadows. And then in Bryansk, six people were killed, and I don't know if a seventh has succumbed to his injuries or not. They just they basically hit civilian structures, and
Well, the Donetsk headlines felt right out of 2014, 2015, honestly.
they really did. They really did.
And
And they
I
did a
hate to
double
say it,
tap on
but
both on in both areas.
I thought we were
Just as the
past that.
Americans did a double tap on that school of girls in Iran.
Yes, and I hate to say it, but I thought we were past that with Donetsk. But the British getting involved with, of course, missiles instead of just shelling, it does
Yeah.
change the game, and it does show that while Russia is poised to win this war, while Ukraine is not in a good position, they can still inflict a lot of pain while they're standing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the message that they want to have is this war will never end.
Yeah, and that it's relevant. I know Iran's going on, but remember Ukraine too. I mean, that's been the main complaint of the European elites about this whole Iran thing. Not anything principled. It's that Ukraine's not getting enough attention. But we'll get into that if you want to
Yeah.
get into the minutia minute.
Sure. So I see that you've got the first map up. As you can see, the Russians have made gains in all sorts of areas, including new areas in the north. That's where you see those arrows at the top in the Sumy region, even close to the Sumy Chernigov region. So this is part of the buffer that Russia wants to create in the northern northeastern part of Ukraine. Uh, but as I say, well, as we've already discussed, we'll see just how effective this will be. In any case, some of these pushes in these areas are to draw the Ukrainians away, particularly in Zaporozhye, which is an area where the Ukrainians have made about 230 square kilometer gains in the last month. So it's very significant. That's a good segue to lead to the next map, which is the Zaporozhye front. Now, these maps reflect gains and losses by both sides in the last 5 to 6 days. There was no update today by Weep Union, and I would suspect the reason for that is that this was a particularly harsh winter in the northern hemisphere, just as it was in the northeastern part of the U.S. and eastern central part of Canada. It was also the case in Ukraine. Looking at this war now for 4 years, and it began near the end of winter. I've never seen Ukraine in the footage so snow covered, which of course means that the Rasputitsa, the time of the wet earth and the mud, is going to be much worse than it has been in any other season. The ground going hard, I would say, unless something happens, unless we get a heat wave in early summer, I don't see that happening until like mid-May. So, but no more dilly-dallying. So, as you can see, the Ukrainians have continued to push in this area. I did a small blow up in the slide below the one that you've just highlighted. So this area is in the Zaporozhye, sorry, not Zaporozhye, the Dnipropetrovsk area. The gold outline represents gains that the Ukrainians made last week. The blue represents some gains that they made, I would hazard to say, like Wednesday or Tuesday of this week. Now, you see the red arrows, by those are Russian forces, but no gains. What does that mean? Well, this blue oblong shape that you see at one time for a few hours stretched much further south, but the Russians began to pincer on either side, east and west, and that forced the Ukrainians to retreat. And it's this much smaller salient that they've had to settle with. The next map is just a little northeast of here. Again, this is in the Novopavlovka area. The Russians making some gains around the outskirts of the town in the southwest sector. This is another one of those towns that has shifted borders several times for months and months. And but the whole point of this, and the next slide will demonstrate it, is you see those red lines. So that follows the Yanchur River, and this is what the Russians want to gain: is a front line that mirrors the river. They want that southern bank of the river, and that's why Novopavlivka is so important for them to gate. And Ivanovka is, I mean, Ivanovka. How many towns in Ukraine are named Ivanovka? There has to be like at least 10. Anyhow, let's move to Donetsk and the Pokrovsk region. The Russians now have started their offensive here. For at least 2 months, the Ukrainians formed all kinds of counteroffensives. We remember the incident with all the helicopters, well, two helicopters that got shot down, and their special forces that were eliminated by the Russians. And then the failed Russian attack that followed to get Grishne, or Krishne, as the Ukrainians would say.
You
Now
don't have to flatter
virtually,
them. None of them are watching.
that's right. So Grishne is like 97% captured now. That's what all those little red icons mean. And Rodinske is now finally secured. I mean, technically, the Russians control that area, the entire town. But now, as you can see, that they're pushing further. Uh, Sorry, this next slide is a repeat. I'm just gonna get rid of it. Yeah, so this slide with the arrows tells you what the Russians are wanting to do. They want to secure this area outside of Pokrovsk, because obviously they want Pokrovsk now to be kind of like uh Velika Novoselovka, or any of these towns that were fought over and now are hubs. They want like a wide girth around these towns that keep them safe. If there's any potential counteroffensive by the Ukrainians, it will take them a long time to even get close to the town, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the point
Well, it
of
shouldn't go without saying, but these hubs that were valuable to the Ukrainians are obviously are going to be just as valuable to the Russians, and they want to fortify them for that
yes,
reason.
that's right, that's right. And they want these as logistic hubs so they can push further. And that's the whole point of it. I don't know. I'm going to get rid of the next slide because it's kind of repetitive. People get the point. Now, moving slightly eastward towards Konstantinovka, you can see that the Russians have made some gains in this area as well. Um, the slide after this one will demonstrate like where this is in the southwestern pocket. The Russians have managed to capture Stepanovka, and where the arrows are northeast of it is oh, Novopost, no, Ilinka. Yeah, Ilinka. Oh, my God rest her soul, my aunt's name was Ilinka. Anyway, so this town has been captured. Again, for the same reason, the Russians are going to want to envelop Konstantinovka, and they need as much ability to send supplies into this area because prior to capturing this area, the Russians captured what is the most fortified area in Konstantinovka, and that is immediately adjacent to the arrows on the right side. Those are the high rises, or they're not high rises, but they're apartment building complexes. They're anywhere from 5 to 8 stories high. Most of them are like honestly 5, 6 stories. So, and the next map will show you where Konstantinovka is. So there's a view of the city, and they're going to want to push further. But up until capturing these areas, delivering supplies to the outpost that had captured this part of Konstantinovka was quite difficult. And so now that's been settled. Um, the next slide will show you again Konstantinovka, but to the right of it, to the east of it. This is an area that the Russians had momentarily some success, but then it backfired. They didn't have enough troops, and they were wiped out from this area. History Legend did a video of that a few months ago. They've since then recaptured this area, and as the arrows indicate, they're going to be going further north, and that's one of the things that they didn't do before. Is they veered ahead straight west, and all the forces from the north is actually what destroyed the gains that they made in the outskirts of eastern Konstantinovka. Finally, we move to the area of Slavyansk. Uh, this is just west of uh, Seversk. You can see that the Russians have made some good gains in this area. They're going, of course, this has to work in tandem with what's happening in Konstantinovka because there's that whole ridge of urban agglomerations that basically form a defensive wall for the Ukrainians in the Donetsk region. These are the last cities of Donetsk, and this is a blow up of it. You can see that the area that they took, which given for the way this war has been going, is substantive. And then finally, this slide demonstrates another reason why they want to get to Slavyansk, and that is on the way, about 60% of the way. That line going up next to the arrows, that's a canal, and the Russians want to at least get there as a for where the this body of water acts as a um, basically a fortification for the Russians. North of there, the Russians have also made some gains in the forested area around Uzume, and it's I forget the name of this place. If it's Banja Luka, there's another place. There's a place in Serbia that sounds like that, where they have Luka.
Banja
Um,
Luka, that's the capital of Republika Srpska.
yeah, to jest. Okay, so so then we move to the northernmost area of Donetsk Liman. I've circled Liman. So this is another example of the Russians wanting to cut off all supplies. The reason they're focusing so much in the northwest right now is because the only sort of direct roads into Liman are from this area. All the roads otherwise are much smaller to the south and southwest, and they go through forested areas. They can give good cover, but it's difficult for large shipments to go through. And so that's why they want to cut this off, and they also want to take care, they want to capture those. The yellow fortifications that you see just beneath the arrows, and there won't be a proper storming of Lima until that happens because it's a larger town. It's a I wouldn't doubt if I don't know if it's larger than Konstantinovka, but my gut says it is. I could be wrong. And then finally we come to this is just well, we can ignore this slide. It's just a little. It's kind of a repeat. Finally, we get to Kharkov Sumy region, and that outline in red again is part of the buffer. The Russians have been pushing in this area quite a bit after they've managed to gain a lot of territory in the Volchansk area. Finally, in the Sumy region, we see that the Russians have also expanded the buffer zone. This is just north of this area, sorry, south of this area that we're looking at, near the bottom of that red squiggly line. Um, yes, and then I would say that's it. There's another area just north of here where the Russians have also made some incursions. Um, we'll see how that goes. And then finally, in the overall map that if you can show again, all of these territories that are being taken are where the two arrows are at the top, just so everybody understands. And that's it for the frontline news.
Well, I will say, compared to at least the information we've gotten over the past few weeks, no thanks to the Iran war's preeminence in discussion, this does seem like a pretty active past week and a half in Ukraine. And what I did fear happened, we discussed this more towards the beginning of the show, but I'll say again, is that the Ukrainians started making more desperate moves, particularly with Bryansk and Donetsk, to draw attention back to themselves. And as you were saying, with the assistance of the British, with their targeting, with their weaponry, it has been what you'd really expect because you look at the dynamics between Trump and Starmer, the questions over Iran. Well, at the end of the day, it's because the European elite has invested themselves so much in this Ukraine war upon American
Hmm.
promises made by the Biden administration that once we collapse Russia, it's your discretion, you'll be able to pillage it, and all your resource needs will be solved, and your threat to the east will be non existent. And it's your reward for being vassals. We're going to have it done before the end of 2022, and here we are over 4 years since this war began. In fact, 4 years ago, right now, the negotiations with Medensky and the Ukrainian team were going on right now. The Ukrainian team that got quote unquote, uh, you know, died quote unquote by accident were probably assassinated if it's any indication. But that is where we stand right now, and understandably, these elites who have staked everything on it. You see this rhetoric from Macron. You see it from Macron's really one of the last original ones that's in power from when this war started. The rest of them have either been voted out or there's been cabinet reshuffles. I suppose, yeah, Maloney was actually elected after the war started, and she's been one of the more stable ones, believe it or not. But even with Starmer and Mertz, they inherited this war. They inherited these promises, and they're looking at the situation right now, and they also have to contend with the energy crisis looming over Europe and the global economic crisis that is looming because of this war in Iran. So now is the time, and perhaps this was premeditated, perhaps this was part of the plan of American strategy makers in Washington, to get Europe to go all in on Ukraine even more so than they have been before. Where they're going to
Hmm.
dump every last thing, where they're going to pull out all the stops, where they are going to give them the Storm Shadows or the Taurus missiles. I wouldn't be surprised if Germany made similar moves to the British in light of this. Even though there always is that calculus, are they going to perhaps take a more pragmatic stance towards the Russians for the time being? Are they going to try to fool them with Minsk 3 in order to alleviate their energy and economic crises? Perhaps. And perhaps Putin is short sighted enough to take that deal. But the other option is they're going to double down, they're going to triple down, so that even the more hesitant voices who have still been, of course, very supportive of Ukraine or the Ukrainian war effort, I should say, this war has not been good for Ukraine in any way, shape, or form, but who have been very supportive of the Ukrainian war effort, they need a victory. Anything. They need some sort of proof that the Ukrainians are still viable. There were the reports earlier this week about it was, I believe it came from the European Union as an organization. I believe it came from Kai Kallas, leaning on the Ukrainians, saying you just need to make it 18 to 24 months, and then we
Yes,
can have the,
another 18 to 24 months.
as long as it takes. That's what they've been saying since 2022. As long as it takes. It, even though I have to say on the other end, if we are to take the words of Emmanuel Todd at face value, in which case I'm not saying he's infallible, I'm not saying he's incapable of making mistakes, but he's been right about a number of things. One of his key predictions going into this war is that if Russia does not have this war wrapped up by the 5-year mark, it's going to be more of a long-term defeat than a long-term victory. And I agree with him on that. And
Mhm.
there is more nuance to be had to that take that I could get into. But point being is Russia, yes, their economy is chugging along. They have the military industry to support this. But they also have a crisis brewing to their south with the situation in Iran. And that is going to affect them slowly but surely. It might not be immediate, but a collapsed Iran, a balkanized Iran in worst case scenario, would be a significant loss for the Russians. It wouldn't collapse them. It wouldn't be the end of Russia as a power as we understand it today, but it would be a massive headache that they would have to deal with. In which case, they don't want to deal with that. But in a scenario, and I'm just thinking worst case scenario for Russia right now, were that were to happen and Ukraine were to drag on, even in the face of Russian victories, lower Russian casualties than Ukrainians, military industry and economy still being stable, over the long term, that can start to undermine them. And it reminds me something I saw circulating this week, which I thought was relevant, was the Rand report document about the overextension of Russia from 2019. I'm not going to go through that. I'm not going to read it. But you see that right now. I don't think there's ever any question about it. But there is an attempt to link these two ongoing wars in order to overextend Russia. And
Yes.
while I do, once again, doing this show every week or so, we see the progress happen on the front lines. We see the Ukrainians being slowly but surely pushed back. It does raise a sense of concern for the Russians, at least as for where I'm looking at it, that they might be kicking this can down the road too long, and perhaps it is time to take more concrete measures to wrap up this war so that they have resources freed up and so that they have the situation stabilized enough for the next inevitable crisis. Because maybe it's not Iran, maybe this entire Iran situation resolves itself tomorrow. Let's just say for the sake of the argument it does. There's still the crisis in Kaliningrad, there's still the crisis in the Balkans, there's still the crisis in the Baltic, there's still the Caucasus, East Asia, say any sort of dispute between China or any of its neighbors breaks out. Russia would almost certainly get drawn, and maybe not directly, but they would have a stake in seeing a certain outcome in that conflict if China were to get in some sort of military engagement in one of those, or if there was a renewed tensions on the Korean Peninsula, or really anything on the, I guess you could say, Eurasian landmass. That would probably necessitate Russia's attention. I mean, look at Syria. Now, they've managed to soften the blow of Syria through, let's just say, less than desirable negotiations with Jelani, Israel, and Turkey. I do think that a lot of that at least looks embarrassing, even if the outcome does serve its purpose. But point being is, it's still a degraded position from when Assad was in power. And the longer this goes on in Ukraine, the more I fear that they can walk themselves into those sort of situations, particularly with Iran, but also elsewhere, and that the entire goal is to, as the Rand Corporation said, overextend Russia, and there is a real possibility they might be playing into that, but really because they have no choice, because either they play this game of chess that's been set before. And I'm not saying that the Russians don't have their own ambitions, but a lot of what's going on has largely been initiated by the American empire, by outside parties. They can either play that and try to win, or accept a slow, long term defeat by doing nothing. So it really does create, in the case of Ukraine in particular, and Russia's strategic situation in general, a very much damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of position that is very hard to get out of. And that is my big concern with Russia going forward. The war with Iran in its relation to Central Asia over the course of the next years and decades can very quickly become a festering problem that is an immediate threat to Russia.
Right. It could mean that the Americans even re-enter Afghanistan to a certain degree, right? Because Afghanistan right now, of course, Afghanistan flanks Iran on the east side, and Iran has so far very good relations with the Afghanis. So that's going well for them in that respect, right? The west side of Iran is really the only side which isn't getting hit. And I imagine that a lot of planes and all kinds of supplies have been already moved there. But just to return briefly to what you're saying about Russia, I completely agree. Now, recently, Emmanuel Todd did make a statement on his Substack that he basically here's the thing. He basically thinks that Russia has already won this war. Uh, does that contradict what he said? Maybe. But it's interesting that he said that.
Yeah, but I mean,
Uh,
analysis can change over time. I don't begrudge him that.
yeah. I mean, the book was published.
It was, I think it
I
was
think
late
20
2022, like fall of
late
2022.
2023. Because
Yes, yes.
I first heard about it in 2024 in the first half, and I found some people like reading it online in like May and June of 2024. Um, I mean, we'll have to wait and see. So he did say that, but I think that doesn't nullify, I think, the concerns that you bring up, because after 4 years, the Russian population is also getting tired of this war, right? And they do want it to wrap up, and they are wondering why aren't if they can assassinate our generals and hit us, why don't you hit them the same way? Why don't you do that which they do to us?
And
Why are
the
you being so?
Khomeini strikes, I think, really escalated things globally because you probably have a lot of Russians asking, well, why is Zelensky still there? Why are any of these
Yes,
people still there? Why is Budanov, who we have listed as a terrorist according to the Russian state, still there?
yeah,
I do want to also point out about your commentary with Afghanistan and Iran, just to backtrack a few moments.
yeah.
There are credible allegations, at least in my opinion, that Iranian leadership is now operating out of Mashhad, which is a city right on the border of Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, and
Oh
also
wow.
historically one of the capitals of one of the Persian states. I can't remember which one, but the point being, it's not without precedent that Iranian leadership would be out of here, and they're not just in some backwater. But for security reasons, it is speculated that they are conducting day to day affairs of state and managing this war out of Mashhad, which is much further tucked inland, up against the borders of Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, and less liable to enemy fire.
Yeah. So I think this spring is going to decide what happens in Ukraine more than any previous one. I would say that 2024 for Russia was very good. 2025 was even better.
we'll have to see what happens in 2026, and we won't really know until we get into the spring, when you can have proper, I don't want to say large mobile based attacks, because those kind of attacks can't happen in this war. That would not have been able to be, I mean, even we and us and all kinds of people who follow this war closely, we're still wondering why aren't big columns pushing, because of drones, because and that's why they won't, because the casualty rate and the rate to manufacture more or repair destroyed equipment, it's just not feasible, and no side wants to do it because it's just too costly. So
And it's a case
I
of
would say I would say that big arrow movements, as they say. Well, I wouldn't count on them, but there won't be. It'll Russia has to make 2025, 2026 better than even 2025 is what I'm saying.
yes, I agree.
Uh, if they can manage that and they can keep that tempo going, then we'll see what happens. At the moment, like, you've seen it the last 3-4 weeks. I can't get proper map updates because there's hardly any changing of territories. Now, the vast it's still in Russia's favor if you just go by kilometers gained, but that's not the entirety of this war. Of course, Putin's still trying to use the strategy of wearing down the Ukrainians, right? Um, Without decimating all of their cities. He's attacking energy infrastructures, but he's not bombing civilians. He's not intentionally bombing civilians.
Yes,
Uh,
because there's an understanding among,
he
if not
can't turn Ukraine into Gaza,
exactly, and
because he knows after him, Russia and Ukraine will have to see eye to eye at one point or another, and it will come after him. And it won't happen if he does what many Russians would like to see him do, because of their frustration.
yes, and that gets back to the point that at the end of the day, regardless of what ethnic or ideological concerns one might want to bring up, this is a civil war between Russians and Ukrainians. They are, in effect, even when you consider the more Western fringes, part of one greater nation, whether they like it or not, and that when this war is over, they're going to have to negotiate some sort of coexistence. And that's going to be difficult. What form that's going to take, it could end up with, say, maybe some of the Western fringes back under the umbrella of the West, like it has been historically, like we've seen with Galicia under either the Poles or the Austrians or whatever it might be. Not that I'm saying they would reform those states, but point being is it would be a similar kind of arrangement to that. But you are correct that following this war, there is going to need to be some sort of understanding between Russians and Ukrainians, especially the Ukrainians who end up on the Russian side of the border, about how they're going to continue together in the future, because otherwise they are committing themselves to a war that can only win with the absolute collapse and implosion of another side, which,
Mhm.
even though that would be a victory in the most technical sense, in terms of what it means for their broader nation, it would be a defeat. Russia having to integrate a Gazified Ukraine, if you will, would be
Yes,
a nightmare. And that
it would be an economic and a financial nightmare,
cultural and political nightmare as well.
cultural, the whole thing.
Everything.
Yes, but what the Russians are thinking is, it doesn't matter whether we do this to them or not. They're going to hate us forever. That's the argument that other Russians are making. This is the bind that Putin is in, right? And maybe this will be a good tie-in to what's happening in Iran and the Middle East. But all those times that Witkoff and Kushner are going in there, what they're proposing is basically what Blinken and company were probably doing with with Russia, with Putin, with Lavrov, just before Syria fell. They're basically saying, look,
We will give you Ukraine. I mean, whether they're honest about that, and this is my speculation. We'll give you Ukraine if you just abandon Iran. Ukraine for Iran. Okay, we'll make it work one way or another because, of course, Iran is the most important issue for America, much more important than Ukraine. I'm sure that kind of offer keeps being repeated over and over and over and over again. But I think
Trust us,
after
Putin. We would never
after
stab you in the back.
yeah, after Syria, I don't know if they can be believed, and I think that's why the status quo continues, and that's why Trump has decided, okay, then we're going to go for it. In the lead up to this war.
Well, I suppose a good bridge between Ukraine and Iran is the Trump-Putin phone call, the first one they've had since
Mm.
Valdai, in which Kremlin readouts described it as frank and
And it was
productive.
Trump that phoned him.
Yes, that's a very important point, that it was Trump who came to Putin. And the readouts you can usually get from Kremlin press releases are usually pretty detailed, but they were a little scant on details this time, at least in my opinion, compared to what they usually put out. And I believe it's Peskov who's in charge of that, or is it Ushakov? It's one of the two.
Ushakov.
Yeah, it's Ushakov who's in charge of drawing those up and publishing those. But the speculation from what was said about this is that Trump clearly wants an off ramp for Iran. And my speculation on that is Trump had Bibi in his ear. He had Bibi drop intelligence documents from Mossad or whoever saying, get rid of the Ayatollah, hit these sites, it's going to be great. The Iranians are vying for freedom. Just remember the 40,000 protesters, etc., and it's going to be great. Well, funny enough, the CIA, who admittedly Trump has no reason to trust, they have done him dirty over the years, so I don't blame him in that particular sense for not taking the CIA at its word. But yeah, the CIA and American intelligence saying, this is going to be a long haul. You even have General Kane, who he appointed to replace Milley, saying, this is going to be a long haul. If you commit to this, it's going to be something that is going to consume your entire term in office, your last term in office. But even with the voice of somebody who he handpicked to advise him on military matters, to be head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he still takes Bibi's intelligence documents and proceeds with the operation, assuming that all will go well. And perhaps he was in a bind. Perhaps he had no choice because of a number of factors. I'm not saying this to morally absolve him, but I do think it's important to understand that the power of the president is not as omniscient as some people would think. Like I said, that's not any sort of excuse for their behavior or their decisions, but we do need that to understand the context of that. And he went in full force, and who does he decide to call to bail him out? It's not going to be, say, the Europeans. They're vassals. Their main issues fetching about Ukraine at this point. China, the situation's rocky there. I know that Putin and not Putin, but Trump and Xi Jinping are supposed to meet next month, and that's going to be an interesting meeting, if it even still happens. So he needs this wrapped up. He needs a bow on this. And perhaps the easiest way is to hail the execution of Khamenei and the destruction of the Iranian nuclear program, in which case he's hoping that Putin can do that for him. There was the proposal that the enriched uranium be handled by Russia as a third party that, of course, was rejected. And we've been through the song and dance how many times at this point throughout these negotiations? Of course it's going to be rejected. And I think it was Trump who actually turned the idea down. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And frankly, I'll have to say I haven't seen much from Trump in terms of press conferences. The people I've heard from are Rubio, Hegseth, and Kane. No real sign of Trump. He's made a few public statements. Vance has completely disappeared from public life, which I have my I have my speculations on that I might get into later. Gabbard has been completely sidelined. She was supposed to be the moderating voice against the neoconservatives, the one who was supposed to really manage the intelligence agencies so they would give Trump reliable information. But what does he do when he gets that reliable information? He throws it out and asks Rubio and Bibi what to do. every time.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And every intelligence agency advised against him doing this.
yeah, the
The
people
Wall
he put
Street
in.
Journal, yeah, the Wall Street Journal actually today claimed he knew in advance what the dangers were. He believed that as soon as they killed the Ayatollah, that the possibility of Iran blocking the Straits of Hormuz would actually be uh, very small. Again, this is sort of like, you talk to people. There are some people who revel in their stupidity, like they like letting you know that they don't care to know more about this or that group that they don't like anyways. Well, that's okay when they're weak, but when you can't get what you want and they appear stronger, then there are problems. Now, um, of course, there's so many facets to this war. America is obligated to stay there. It can't leave. And the reason it can't leave partly is because that whole Saudi peninsula on the other side of the Persian Gulf, with like places like Dubai, as we all know, they're the equivalent of Swift's banks in the Middle East. And Israel and America both rely on them. And America relies on the petrodollar.
And there's so much mutual investment between the Gulf states and the U.S.
Yes.
that
Yes.
it would be an economic disaster worldwide if there were to be that pullout. While at the same time, you have these Gulf states who are, number one, irate with the Americans for shirking their security concerns, and number two, also refuse to go that next step and sever ties with the Americans because of those reasons that we had just listed. And I mean, we talked about this when the war started. They are moving missile systems away from their assets in the Gulf to
Yeah.
defend Israel. South
Right.
Korea
And
is
they've
getting
already
pillaged.
lost 3 THAAD systems and 1 radar system that's worth $1.1 billion. Now, we'll get into the KC-135, but 7 refueling tankers that were on the runway in Saudi Arabia have been destroyed by Iran. I can imagine the Israelis in the first 3 days of the war having some of their agents blow up a Saudi oil facility and blaming it on the Iranians, etc., in order to have
Fan those flames.
it's a fan the flames, to have a casus belli and so forth and so on, for the peninsula kingdoms to join in the war, etc., etc. It didn't really work. It's 2 weeks into this war, and like, yeah, maybe Oman and some other countries are shooting down some of the drones. Qatar, I think, is doing that, but they're not flying. They're not crossing the Persian Gulf in order to attack Iran head on. So Iran has not ceased. And like, there's something, there's a conspiratorial angle that I have to entertain. I know everyone says that Iran learned their mistakes from the 12-day war. What if they didn't? What if Iran played weak? Now, it was still the strongest response any country has inflicted on Israel ever.
Can I offer a
What
third
Iran
option?
did was that
What I
the
think
third op
the third
the
option,
third
and I think, is Iran did learn the lessons from the 12-day war, but had insufficient time to adapt to them.
I don't know, 7 months is just not enough to like fully adapt.
Yes, I would agree.
7 months is just not enough. I think they played weak. What's the name of that bird that pretends its wing is broken to lure a predator away from its chicks?
Well, you're making
I
a fool of me because I should know this, but go on.
I I forget now, but I think they played this week. They believed the Americans and the Israelis would underestimate them, and that is what they did.
I think going along with the negotiations, et cetera, et cetera. Are you crazy? Don't you know? Because after the 12-day war, okay, I'll say this. America and Israel are still able to target, obviously, and kill important people, you know, just as they did during the 12-day war. Now, some of those people, 3 weeks later, turned out to still be alive. I've seen one such case right now. And of course, not America and Israel have not been as successful as the 12-day war in eliminating as many as they did. The biggest, this is where I agree with you about the third option to explain what's happening. Um, it's the amount of infiltrators, Mossad agents, CIA agents that they managed to lock up and kill that might have made some of the difference, right? But I still think their strategy was to play weak. I did not expect that they would close the Straits of Hormuz in like literally 2 days. I said it on the show back in February that if things start going bad, they're blah blah blah, they'll close it in about 2 weeks, 12 days maybe, right? No, 48 hours, right? And nobody wants to go through. And you can talk about all the ships you want to sink because it's not the ships play a very minor role in this. The Iranians are using like drones, it's like unmanned submarine suicidal drones, above water drones, like all kinds of. I've seen them take out some of these. 17 tankers have been destroyed.
They've been referring to USVs, which, to my understanding, are drone operated watercraft that they've been using for these
Yes,
attacks.
yes. Thank you. I forgot what the official name is, and um, so I would say there's a good chance that Iran played weak in order. I think they very well knew that Israel didn't get what it wanted after the 12-day war last summer, and they would be back, and it would be sooner rather than later. So yes, in that sense, they can have some planning. They survived the coup attempt. I'm sure that the Americans and the Israelis were hoping that the shock, a civil war could break out, and they would swoop in. They would give the surge from the air, the kind of offense and defense their proxies would have needed in order to topple the regime. But that
Imagine
didn't
how
happen.
bad it has to be when the Kurds don't fall for it.
I know. Even the Kurds are not falling for it. All the Saudi kingdoms on the peninsula are not. They're not engaging in this, and even the Kurds, right? Even the Kurds.
I do have to say, because you brought up the Gulf states, I did appreciate Lavrov's accostation of them. That was very entertaining.
Yeah.
just slapping them upside the head for their. What more can you say?
Yeah.
Just over this entire thing. But
Now,
I'm starting to agree with you where there is a middle ground between the second and third position where the Iranians feigned weakness, that they wanted their opponents to underestimate them for obvious reasons. Yet at the same time, still 7 months, if even, was not enough time to implement the lessons they had learned from the 12-day war. In which
yeah.
case, there are still a lot of holes in their security system. There are still a number of infiltrators. It was never confirmed, so I dismiss it. But point being is, there was the rumors of one of the high-ranking IRGC officers having Mossad ties, and
Yes.
you could say a lot of those stories are put out there to sow division within the ranks. But there's a reason it's believable, because we
Yes.
saw these kind of things happen throughout the years. I mean, I think knowing what we know about the 12-day war, perhaps one day, warrants a retrospective on the Soleimani assassination, how that was aligned, how that was allowed to happen, and what security breaches led to that. But I'm not going to dwell on that for now. But now we're at a point where if this were to stop tomorrow, the damage has been done. If the straits were to open, if Gulf oil facilities were to be rebooted, we'll be reeling for months, if not years, of the economic
Yeah.
impact of this. And the example people have been calling back to is the 1973 oil embargo,
Yeah.
where,
Now, in the last show, I did say it's not as bad as that. Well, it took 1 week. It's worse than that.
yeah. And just to put in perspective, I'm no economist, but the economic fallout from that lasted until most people say 1982. And we're not just talking on the energy market, but on global markets, because oil and gas are so vital for industry, for logistics, that when there is a disruption in those markets, everything goes up.
It
And
very well might have led to the deindustrialization, not the sole factor, but one of the factors that led, because think about it, it's all happening at the same time, right? 1973, that's when Nixon goes to China. He makes a pact with the Chinese. Manufacturing is going to be unbelievably cheaper. That's great because they're in an oil crisis of, that's at least a decade long. And even in Reagan's second or third year, I remember that time vividly. Even though I was in, of course, I'm in Canada, not the U.S., but I remember driving in our neighborhood, and I remember it was the year that we moved from one neighborhood to the other in '81, and I remember driving with my dad, all the shops that had closed down, and which was not the case, like let's say 77, 78, somewhere around there. It was a little bit better, but it was grinding. And anyways, I would say even the oil crisis itself, and that's why America decided to be a net exporter, because so much of their oil refinement that America used was happening in the Texas Panhandle, mostly Texas, but some in Arkansas. And yeah, so I would say that
well, I mean, just to speak anecdotally about the point that you brought up about deindustrialization, my grandfather would have been, I believe, 51 or 52 in 1982, and he was a steel worker. He lost his job around that time.
yep,
So,
yep.
yeah, that would have been the era where a lot of it, there were a lot of factors, but the spike in energy costs, the stagflation, as it were, just the general economic malaise, was really, I think, one of the main factors that you mentioned that killed American manufacturing. And this is
Yep.
coming, and all of this is happening while the guy who promised to reindustrialize America is in office. The guy who wanted to bring back the Rust Belt, bring back Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan, and have them be the just economic engine of the world like they were in the 1960s and the 1950s. Well, that's not going to happen now, is it? I mean,
Oh no, I mean it wasn't going to happen even. It
no,
wasn't going to happen even
absolutely.
without. But I know what you mean. I mean now it definitely
Yeah,
isn't.
what little hope there was of a semblance of that happening. What little hope there
Yes.
was for improvement there. Maybe some degree of reindustrialization, maybe some economic stabilization of a region I live in, that I've lived in my entire life, that I see firsthand the effect of what happened over the past 30, 40 years. Well, it's just not going to get any better, at least in that regard. And we're coming up on the midterms. I know that's a point that people keep beating to death, but we are coming up on the midterms. We're coming up on the 2028 presidential election. That'll be here before you know it. And at this point, looking at it, until this conflict ends, which there's no end in sight, this could conceivably go on for the entirety of the second Trump term. I'm not saying it will, but I think it's just as likely that they have an on-ramp tomorrow as it is that this war lasts through 2029, for example. With all that being said, this completely consumes Trump's energy. It consumes his attention. There is no other room for policy. He chose to become a wartime president. Something
The guy,
that,
the peace president.
yeah, the
He
peace.
was asked. He was asked today if he's still interested in Nobel Prize. I don't want to talk about it. I'm not interested in it anymore.
Oh, he got it. He got it from the Venezuelan woman. Mission accomplished.
He got a better Nobel Prize, something better than the Nobel Prize, the FIFA Prize for Peace.
Oh, you're right. Well, didn't they give him that menorah that one time that called him the Prince of Peace?
Yeah, of course.
Ugh.
Anything cringe, like
Yeah, that wonderful. But you know what? He stopped 8 wars. He gets licensed to start one.
I stopped 8 wars so I could have World War III.
I also love it when you dig into those wars. Like they say Serbia, Kosovo, as if a shot has been fired. No, don't get me wrong. That the situation in Kosovo is atrocious. Even as we speak right now, there is the ethnic cleansing of Serbs in Kosovo. Do not forget that. But point being is, it has not been a hot war since 1999.
Yeah.
More recently in your homeland, there were clashes with Albanians than there were in Kosovo.
Yes.
To a significant state actor level. Like I said, I don't want to downplay what's happening right now. But the wars he cites, you'll notice it was Serbia, Kosovo, Cambodia, Thailand, which nothing ever came of that. What were some of the other ones that he? Oh yeah, Israel, Gaza, and Israel. You see, he stopped Israel, Iran, so he could start Israel, Iran. It was. Yeah, but ended 9 wars. Russia, Ukraine is the toughest nut to crack. Maybe if we bait Putin to a phone call where we send a drone strike in, maybe that will end the Ukraine
Maybe
war.
that'll do it. We've tried everything.
Yeah, we tried everything. But this is ultimately proof that Trump and Putin are collaborating because the oil market has undergone a shock. It saved the Russian economy. And Agent Krasnov is doing his job as planned. Putin planned for all of this with no
People
concern.
literally believe this shit.
With no concern of his strategic position in Iran and Central Asia afterwards. That's how monomaniacal Putin is.
You know,
Look at a map! I want to sit these people down and I want to shove a map in their face and ask them how it makes sense. Point to me on the map where this makes sense.
Yeah. Because now Iran has very maximalist goals. They want America out of the Middle East. I don't think they're going to settle. Like, America is not. I mean, these bases in Idlib and the Iraqi side of the Iran-Iraqi border, they've been devastated. There were French special forces there. 6 of them have been injured. As I said, the KC-135 was shot down. 6 Americans went down, plus 1 Frenchman that was on board as well. There was another plane, also a refueling plane, which was damaged but did manage to land in Israel. I saw the photos. The tail was damaged, but it managed to
I'm surprised Israel let him
find
land.
safe. Yes. So they went to the non-Jewish quarters. So, uh, how is Iran going to be appeased after this? What will America do? How are they going to end this? Because if America leaves, that whole racket that's set up in the Persian Gulf with Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, et cetera, um, all those places are losing their real estate value. Um, Iran yesterday attacked the Dubai stock exchange. Workers are leaving. It's not safe there. How many I can't even keep track of how many oil facilities the Iranians have hit. Granted, they've done that as a retaliation, but
the economic costs are still there regardless of who did it, for what reason.
Yes. And how many companies that are producing gas as well as oil for consumers? How many of them have stopped operations? Like, several of them.
Well, keep in mind, this all comes less than a year after Trump goes on this big courting effort of the Gulf states. Remember the scandal over the Qatari donation of a new Air Force One plane? That was May of last year. And all that goodwill that he had built with them courting all this Gulf investment in the United States and vice versa, has all been pissed away on behalf of Netanyahu's government in particular, but the Israeli state as a whole, to meet their so-called security interests. And the funniest part of that is that they're not even accomplishing the strategic goals they set out to, because they're now also at war with Hezbollah and Lebanon. And they have to take cover from Iranian missiles. That Hamas, for the first time in months, actually had a public military parade in the Gaza Strip. So all of these strategic goals that they have been trying to accomplish with the great deal of bloodshed and treasure spent, both ours and theirs, for the past 2.5 years almost, is now all for naught. Because even if Iran were to collapse, even if there is enough attrition to, say, collapse the Iranian regime, turn Iran into a failed state like Syria or Libya, Israel is still going to reel from the effects of this conflict for a number of years. And I think Israel had lost its most important selling point, was its myth of invincibility. They lost that on October 7th. But Israel has lost its myth of invincibility. Look at the lines at Ben Gurion Airport. I know it's anecdotal. But how many, say, New York stockbrokers are going to want to settle in the West Bank after this?
Why are all the people who were promised this land leaving?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. But once again, it begs the question, from the diaspora, how many are going to look at Israel and think, I think I'd rather live there after the devastation this war has wrought is done? Even if there's and I'm not saying the Israeli state's going to collapse, but even if there is an Israeli state intact after this, what are the prospects there? What are the opportunities?
More Israelis left, more Jews left Israel last year than came in.
Oh, yes. That was, I think, for the first time in decades that it happened.
Yeah.
Because, and even among that, while there are, don't get me wrong, a lot of them who are still very, very much pro-Israel, pro their homeland, a lot of the diaspora see themselves as more of this kind of libtarded world citizen type who doesn't believe in ethno-nationalism of any kind, even if it's theirs. And that you look at, funny enough, a lot of the push behind the pro-Palestinian movement in the United States and the West, it is a lot of these lefty Jews who have this more internationalist vision of the world. But my ultimate point is their ability to court the diaspora like they used to has completely faded. Because you have a combination of, number one, these non-religious Jews who are just kind of, in a sense, identityless beyond the fact that they might have had a bar mitzvah and eat matzo ball soup, just to embrace all the stereotypes. You have the ultra-Orthodox communities who probably have a 50-50 chance of being anti-Zionist for religious reasons because they believe that the Messiah, the Antichrist, has to lead them back to the Holy Land and not a secular state. But the other consideration about them, and much more material concerns, is a lot of them aren't the most productive people. They like to, let's just say, exercise generous use of state benefits no matter where they live. And those are the two populations you have to court. I mean, and let me just put it this way. Don't you think there's a reason why Ben Shapiro lives in the United States and not Israel?
Yeah.
Like, if it's that great, if it's that much of a beacon of his people's land, why has he not exercised his right to return? Just him as an example.
His wife is Israeli.
And she lives here, I presume.
Yeah.
Would you look at that? That's amazing. Yeah, how they would rather live in the United States, live in the Western world, where they're just as privileged, if not more, than the missile fire gallery that Israel has become. And I have to say, my biggest projection for a situation where Israel collapses is from immigration. Israel is probably not going to be militarily defeated in the conventional sense, if it is, but it's going to be because the people who built Israel lose faith in it. Which I think, I'm not saying is a certainty, I'm not saying is even a likelihood or possibility, but ever so slightly, that could happen. And I've been saying that since October 7th. The immigration numbers are starting to line up with that. But we have to track this on a long-term trend. But if this is the new nature of the Middle East, if American power projection is not able to enforce Israeli security the way it was, say, up until the 1990s, how appealing of a project is it? Especially now
Mhm,
that they seem
mhm.
eager to burn every bridge that they build. I mean, look at their feud with Turkey right now. One of the most pro-Israel Muslim countries. And what are they
Right.
doing?
And what is Israel? What has Israel been saying?
You're next.
That Turkey is
Yeah.
next. They want no one contending them in the entire region, from Turkey to Pakistan. They don't want. Maybe Pakistan comes after Turkey, but of course the Gulf states are useless, anyways.
Yeah,
So
and same with Egypt and Jordan. I mean, Egypt
yeah,
has
yeah,
potential, but I mean, look at it. It's not going to do anything.
yeah. So they want no contenders. They want no perceived threats. They want total control of this region. And part of the reason the Israelis are pushing for this is because I think, frankly, they understand, and we've been saying on this show for a long time, that as America becomes more and more diverse, it will not be able to coherently bond together and fight foreign wars, as it did when the population was largely white. So I mean, just from the late 90s, it was like, what was it, 80% white? It's down to like 57 now.
At best. And then,
Less than half the people under 20 are white. So who's going to fight this war? I think they understood that they have to do it now. And that's why they have these idiotic, campaigns, people who are not directly, openly aligned with Israel, pushing this ridiculous, brand new Gladio ideology of you can't stick up for the brown people. Like, dude, it's not even about brown people.
yeah,
Like,
where a Mizrahi Jew is going to come out and tell you that Israel's part of white Western civilization. That's what the
yeah,
psyop is. It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
I've seen Palestinians who look more European than you do, but point being is your psyop is pointless. One other thing I have to bring up, which might be a touch morbid, but I mean the boomers are dying off, and they're the people who are really invested in this project, either from a religious or a secular standpoint. And that when you look at who majority supports Israel in the United States, it is 50 plus.
yeah. Yeah, and actually, you see a lot of Protestant churches are like, okay, yeah, the evangelicals are kind of still going, but uh, I mean, you and I know it. We're both Orthodox, and we see a lot of converts. I see a lot of converts, and these people are not coming from I mean, they're coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, but many of them are coming from Protestant backgrounds, like Anglicans have joined our church. Several Persians have joined our church. Even at the other church that I attend from time to time, that has been the case.
Yeah, I met an old stock German Lutheran the other day, or at least former Lutheran.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago there was a Canadian Protestant guy who came, and an Anglican Canadian guy who came, and the Anglican guy is he's showing up regularly now.
And
So
then to extend an olive branch, I mean, the traditional Catholics have also done quite well for themselves in that manner.
right. So I guess what we're trying to say is, um, where's the young population going to be at? We know that people 40 and under don't support Israel. They're fed up. They feel like, for many reasons, Israel is one of them, but their future has been squashed because of this inexplicable, irrational support for Israel and Jewish interests, right? But you can also see that Jewish interests in America are very, right now, they're okay, they feel besieged, but they do like that feeling anyways. They're used to that. But however, the flip side of being desperate that this is the last chance they can do this is they also feel extremely confident that America is finally theirs. It is finally theirs. Pete Hegseth did a 10-minute speech today, and he was bemoaning that CNN would dare ask if Trump knew the hazards of if bringing war against Iran, and how that would almost assuredly mean the closing of the Straits of Hormuz, which of course the Iranians had always said that they would do that. It just didn't happen on the 12-day war, and that's part of the whole playing weak. But Hexeth got upset, and then he says, you know, I can't wait till Ellison, the guy who bought out CBS and put Barry Weiss in charge.
Ugh.
I can't wait till Ellison buys CNN. We need that. It's like I have never seen. I mean, these people, they just have no pride. They've completely sold out to Jewish interests in America, and that gets me to another thing.
Well, Haig
I
said
like,
he does it for free. If you look at some of the stuff, I've seen some clips
yeah,
circulating about how
yeah,
he's
when he
talking
visits the
about the third
rabbis and
temple and
yeah.
moving the embassy to Jerusalem, and he was just ecstatic over it.
Yes, and I mean, even Netanyahu said that he gave a speech where he says the return of the Messiah. It's like, who's he talking to? Jews don't believe the Messiah is returning. They believe he hasn't even come yet, right? He's of course trying to get the evangelicals, mostly white, to go fight and die for them,
Well,
because Israel, of course, can't do it. They cannot get the world that they want without America.
well, what I do
Now,
think is funny is you're seeing
mm,
some pilot programs right now in Latin America and Africa where
yes.
these evangelical, I guess, sects we can call them, are taking root and, of course, are very fanatically pro-Israel, and that it does seem like they're running tests for, well, what's a plurality white America going to look like? How much can we convince the new America
Right.
to adopt these beliefs?
Yeah, no, I mean, take Islam. They're still divided between like Arab, Kurd, Turk, and Persian. They have ethnic hatred. I mean, biologically, they're very, very similar to each other. Linguistically, they're different from one another. Culturally, not so much. However, they still have this animosity, and that's stronger now than it has been before,
Well, as we were
and it will
talking
probably
about,
continue.
I think that we decided that Sunnis are the most useful golems behind Anglos.
Yes. So yeah, exactly. So sorry, there was a point. Yeah. This is it. Now, I like Brian Berletic to a certain degree, but of course, lately he's been getting very upset that people are saying Israel is making America do this. I mean, he won't even say that. The same people who control America obviously control Israel. Anyways, so this continuity of agenda that can be explained in that way. But take, for instance, in the opening of the war in Gaza, when the Israelis bombed that hospital, and all the Western media ran cover for them, essentially ran cover for them. I remember the BBC having like diagrams about how maybe Hamas was in there,
We found
right?
one rifle.
Yeah, we found. Yeah, you remember all of that, but I remember even diagrams, and it was just absurd. The whole thing was absurd, but they ran cover for Jewish interests, right? And well, lo and behold, when America destroys, and of course hospitals have been destroyed in Iran already, but when over 165 schoolgirls were killed by the Americans, double tapped. Okay, so when that happens, there's all this condemnation. Now, initially, I thought Israel did it, but it turns out it might have been America. Now, I don't know if we'll ever know the truth. What I do know, however, to counter like some of the stupid shit that Berletic says, is the condemnation has come, and it's not just because the West is not ready for this war. The condemnation has come against America that everyone still perceives somehow is still like Protestant and white,
Yes, against the
which
America of, say, 1984, 1985.
right, even 94. So you know, part of the reason this happens is because there's a kind of a thing in America where culturally Americans will say, yeah, I know my government's doing this. I'm not crazy about it. So there's a kind of like, I know they're doing this, therefore I'm not responsible for this. Right? Now that is something that's at work on a deeper level, but that doesn't mean to excuse what I'm talking about here, which is Israel. They will always just run cover for it. Israel cannot be perceived as like a horrible country, a vile, evil society, which it is, but it can't be perceived that way. Um, Part of this, of course, is the historical precedent that they've manufactured that the Israelis were always attacked first, never the other way around. I mean, they've invested over half a century of creating this narrative. So that's another reason why they have to continue with this. But another is they're owned. Coming back to what Hexet said, he wants Jewish interests and Jewish economic power and financial power to run his country. It's just pathetic. So, anyways, just think about that. Think about how Israel got almost no flack because they destroyed over a dozen more hospitals after that, and there wasn't that kind of an outrage that we saw within the Western media. Yes, part of it is because the West now it's been dragged into a commitment it's not sure it can fulfill. So, anyways, that's it for my rant.
No, that's interesting. And while we're on the topic of Hague, Seth, before we get too much further in the weeds, because there's still a couple other things I want to discuss about Iran. This might be a little bit of a shorter episode. I'll see where the time takes us. But I did see something interesting, more of a tangent. Of this would have been a few years back before Hegseth was in office, of him in some conversation with this Protestant minister, something Wilson. I can't remember his name. Who is going on like, well, in my ideal society, we would even ban Catholic processions for being for being idolatrous. And it's like, this is the same guy who wants to come to the Pentagon, and he came to the Pentagon and talk about how the end times are upon us. We're going to build the third temple and fulfill all these Zionist and Jewish interests. I mean, but no, we can't have a procession because that's blasphemy. I mean, it's wild because they want to sell you about this Bush era narrative of these diabolical Christian conservatives coming to take over and drive America back into the dark ages or whatever. When you get down to brass tacks, what's their main concern? It's building the third temple. Look, they'll maybe have a passing care about, I don't know, gay marriage or abortion or any of the other social ills that might inflict America. But when it comes down to brass tacks, they will accept all of that so long as they get that third temple built and so long as Israeli interests are met. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah. And the religious rhetoric has already come out. It exceeds the rhetoric like back when Bush Jr. was in power. Yeah, I mean, support anything. The conservatives will even support a gay Tel Aviv, right? Like because
Modern day Sodom and Gomorrah down to the geography.
right, like they don't even. How can I put it? Like you can't judge Israel because Israel, I don't know, it can't be judged.
Well, it's amazing because they have this extreme cope where it's like, once we build the third temple and the quote unquote Messiah comes back, all that stuff is just gonna get like firebombed in a race. So they it can be as
yes,
bad
that's
as it
right,
wants,
that's
but
right.
so long as we support Israel hard enough, it'll all just magically disappear one day.
I like how they've fallen for this. I mean, you see it in the New and Old Testament, but especially in the New Testament as a critique. You see how the Jews think they can force God's hand, right? And now the evangelicals, the Protestant evangelicals also think they can force God's hand. If we just do this, this, and this, God's obligated to, do the next thing. If we just return the Jews to Israel, then God is forced to, like, it's even like it's part of America's Enlightenment idea. Like even the Christianity is Enlightenment based. Like God, the great clockworker, and oh, I made the clock. I'm obligated, right? Now I have to do this. It's so stupid, so absurd.
I don't want to delve too much into occultism or esotericism, but that's what it feels like a lot of these ideas are, where humans have some sort of leverage over the divine and not the other way around.
Yeah.
And I would say, in a sense, like I said, I don't want to go into a 30-minute religious discussion, that it does feel almost paganistic in a way, where it's a very transactional
Yes.
relationship with God, where it's like,
Yes.
we have input A, therefore you give us B.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, Speaking of Israel, so they stated today that um, they're going to make a new incursion into Lebanon. I've just
How
sent
many
you a
times
map.
have they tried this?
I know. So that's another group we have to bring up, and that's Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been firing. Granted, they're not great, but their own missiles and drones as far away as Cyprus. For Hezbollah, that's a big deal. Hezbollah is a sub-state actor. It's not even a state. Even Lebanon, a very poor country, still has more money than Hezbollah. And just so as people know, right? By the way, the guys at World War Now have been doing excellent coverage of this war, excellent coverage from an Orthodox Christian perspective. I didn't know this, but Hezbollah does have Christian members. Most of them are Orthodox. Some are Catholic.
Yeah, there was a
Um,
weird union of sorts during the Syrian civil war that pushed it from a less Shia organization to
yeah,
a
there are
more
Christian
big tent.
factions on their own, but they're under the umbrella of Hezbollah command. But I didn't know this until Conrad brought it up. So the last time a Christian was martyred in Iran was 250 years ago. And the last time a Christian was thrown in jail for um, I'm getting tongue-tied,
Proselytization.
proselytization was in 1991. So it's not a law that they really enforce anymore. And of course, you can imagine, what was that Christian? Well, he was an evangelical, right? Obviously, like, it's one of the reasons why the Russians banned Jehovah Witnesses and Mormons,
Yeah, and it's
is
interesting
because,
because when you do see those religious freedom indexes, they count Russia as an anti-Christian state. And I'm not saying that Russia is the most traditional blah blah blah. We've all been through this rigmarole before. But
yeah.
point being,
But if you've been to Russia,
yeah,
you know it's more than America.
yeah. But point being is their primary complaints that they don't let these foreign missionaries spread these heresies.
Right, right. Because they know that they're using them like for geopolitical means, right? Because ultimately it will mean that you will have to be faithful to Israel, therefore America, et cetera, et cetera.
Remember those headlines they were putting out at the start of the Ukraine war, where they were calling Ukraine Europe's Bible Belt because of the evangelical churches there?
Oh my God. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
I'll never forget. I'll never forget my friend, his granddad telling him, "Why are you going to the Baptist church? It's the CIA church."
no, that's the Mormons.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
No, the
So
Mormons aren't even a church. I mean, like down to the I could eat on a charitable day called the Baptist Christians. The Mormons, objectively, I cannot.
yeah, yeah. So uh, just getting back momentarily to Israel, Hezbollah, and Lebanon. Israel has lost 8 tanks, or okay, so not exactly lost, but hit. We can say for sure that about 4 of them are out of commission. 2 of them are in for repairs. There was another one, I think, on Tuesday and Wednesday that like blew its. When a tank blows, how the top. It's just this fire that comes out. So I saw something like that, and I think that was the 8th tank. So these Merkava tanks are not doing so well. So it's kind of shades of 2006 coming back, and there's rumors that Smotrich's son has been severely wounded. Now, there were also rumors, I don't know if this is true. Ben Gvir has been hurt, and people are even saying that Benjamin Netanyahu, sorry, Ido Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu's brother, has been killed. I don't know anything about this. Like, I mean, I've seen the headlines. Nobody's reporting on it. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but
I saw the
I don't.
one about Benjamin Netanyahu. I can't speak to his brother, but the one about Benjamin Netanyahu was disproven that he is indeed still alive.
Yeah, yeah, no. I know he is. Now,
Yeah.
Benjamin Netanyahu, when the war started, flew to Germany.
They need to hide the wings of Zion in a German bunker.
So I don't know if this is, fog of war going on, disinformation campaigns for demoralization, but I think many countries do this, during war.
Oh, it's psyops all the way down.
Yeah.
Nobody has their hands clean of them.
The one thing I will say that seems to be the case is Smotrich's son really is wounded, and Ben Gavir might be in hospital. They're saying it was you know, a car accident that he was involved in, but who knows? Uh, Maybe I doubt that.
Well, that's another interesting point where you see a lot of these American casualties reported. They never report them as engagements with the enemy. It's always some bizarre accident, like fell off something or crashed whatever. Or once again, they always have some stupid excuse as to why this person has either been injured or killed. Never, at a certain point, it becomes more embarrassing than admitting that are a casualty of combat, because at least there's some dignity in that and there's some clarity in that. But they are, I mean, who knows how many casualty numbers the Pentagon is sitting on right now. I hate to imagine what that number might be.
Mhm. They were also saying Rabbi David Meyer Bar was killed. He's one of the many rabbis who was calling for the destruction of Gaza. Again, this is from Press TV. I have seen Israelis on Instagram actually confirm, or what they'll do is they will correct rumors about Ben Gavir being dead, or Smotrich's son is not dead. He was severely injured. And these are like absolutely dyed in the wool Zionists. They're very committed. They're constantly pumping out videos on Instagram. So I think there is some truth to some of these. What the exact truth is, I don't know. And I have to assume we are going to eventually find out, and sooner rather than later.
Well, I do have to
But yes,
say,
so
all
is
things considered, the Israelis have a remarkable press lid on all of this. I'm impressed. And that the Gulf states are actually now finally catching up. I think it was was it the Emirates or Bahrain, one of the two, where they were floating the death penalty for people who filmed and uploaded these strikes.
yeah.
But one of the other elements I want to talk about, and perhaps we can round out the show with this, is the broader picture, the quote unquote proxy war against China, whatever. Now, I think the idea that this war is primarily to strike at the Chinese is, number one, ridiculous on its face. Number two, even from a practical standpoint, while the Chinese are affected, as I joked at the beginning of the show, well, this affects the entire Asian market. So our nodes of influence in East Asia, Japan and South Korea, are also reeling from this energy crisis, and
Yep.
we're in a strange situation where the Japanese, who are already playing coy with the Russians over the Sakhalin pipeline, might actually go through with the reopening of this, because already they've been trying to secure sanctions exemptions. We already see the Treasury Department put out the statement about 1 month exemption of sanctions on Russian oil via tanker. So you're seeing things go in this direction where Russia's energy markets in East Asia, and worldwide for that matter, are benefiting from this, which brings up the Russiagate morons who are going to claim that this is the ultimate proof of collusion. This is what Robert Mueller was waiting for. We're gonna clinch Trump this time. Agent Krasnov is finished, whatever it might be. But you do have to look at the protracted conflict the Americans at this point have objectively gotten themselves involved with in Iran. And people are paralleling a lot of this to the Vietnam War. Now, not in the sense of what it means for the Americans, even though this is a major military investment, but in terms of American strategy vis-a-vis Russian China, and also Russian Chinese strategy vis-a-vis America, where the Americans, even if they don't put boots on the ground, even if this does continue to be a campaign based on standoff munitions, which they might cannibalize from East Asia, we already seen them pull the missile defenses out of South Korea. Mind you, the missile defenses that China sanctioned them over, so that was all for nothing at the end of the day. But we're seeing the Americans weighing the cannibalization of their other global assets in order to bring them to bear against the Iranians, and the question of material intelligence support that China and Russia will give to Iran. And that some speculate that if this goes on long enough, we can see a situation where the Americans keep running themselves up against the wall in Iran, while Russia and China keep a stream of information and weaponry to the Iranians, which could force a concession from the Americans on one, if not multiple issues. People applying the Vietnam model, where we did the same thing in Vietnam. We ran our head against the wall up against North Vietnam until eventually we had to enter backdoor deals with the Russians and even open up relations with the Chinese to extract ourselves from that war. Now, in terms of the height of American involvement, that was post Gulf of Tonkin up until 1973, so 1964 to 1973, 9 years. There was American involvement beforehand, so not to discount that, but in terms of what most people think of as Vietnam. Now, I don't think that this war has the capability to go on 9 years on either side, frankly. But we could see a similar situation where, especially under a new administration, if this is a protracted conflict, and we're talking years, because if we're talking 2029, where a new president, similar to Nixon, not that I think whoever comes next will be anywhere near the same level as Nixon, don't get me wrong, but same dynamic as Nixon, is able to not so gracefully exit, but sell it to the American people as a more graceful exit while we go home to lick our wounds for a decade. And that is a possibility some people are speculating. That's far too broad scale for me to make any definitive statements about at this point. But I could see a scenario where it does develop into that. And I do think that if Russian and Chinese strategists are looking at this from a historical perspective, which both those countries, to my understanding, have a pretty good grasp on their own country's history and how to implement that information in the modern day, unlike most Western countries these days, that they could very easily play this. It's going to be a lot of suffering and toil on the part of the Iranians, but that is the nature of proxy wars. I'm not saying that this is necessarily a good thing that any of this is going to happen, but it might be a reality. But I think the big question is, are the Iranians going to get over their, I guess you could call them isolationist tendencies towards great powers? Not that those aren't unfounded, seeing as Iran is a long-standing state, we're talking thousands of years, a former empire itself, a country that once wielded that kind of power and influence. Are they able to make the concessions necessary to fight that kind of war? And are they willing to be that kind of proxy? And as it stands now, the situation between Iranians and Americans has become so embittered that any pro-American sentiments among the dissident elements of Iranian society, I can imagine, have probably all but evaporated. And the only place you'll find those are in the Western diaspora, who are, I'm not I'm not going to say any more about them. I think everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about. And the only part I think differs from Vietnam is that we have a much more erratic America. And that's not just down to Trump, that's down to the state apparatus. And rather than continually slamming its head against the wall, will this America, either under Trump or a potential successor, be willing to climb the escalation ladder that their predecessors would not have?
Yeah. See, the difficult thing about this war at this moment is arguments for both sides. One, that the war will be short, the other, that it will be long, are both rational, you know?
Yeah. Like I said, it's
like
I could see it ending tomorrow. I could see it ending in 2030.
yeah.
And that does concern me. Where, especially with, once again, how erratic the American state, not any particular leadership, but the American state itself has become on the world stage, that it might climb that escalation ladder. It might start to use more extreme means. And then there's also the question of the Israelis themselves. And that's the real concern. When do they start implementing their doomsday options?
Right. Like if Russia and Iran must be destroyed, and they must be destroyed right now, or like let's say in the next couple of years, there's a way that Ukraine and Iran kind of mirror each other in that for America to do this, they would have to implement the draft, right? If America does this, like I have a friend of mine who's also like he lives in the States. He's a recent convert to Orthodoxy. He's from South America, and
I never thought I'd be happy to be pushing 30. I'll just put it that way.
yeah, yeah, and you know he's talking about like because he's definitely on the right, and he's saying, "Do you think we'll have a civil war?" And I said, I doubt it." Now this was a few months ago, but if there was a draft, I mean, America was very precarious during the 60s and early 70s over the Vietnam War. America's a much more disunified country since then, demographically radically different. Who's going to go die? And this time it's for Israel. Then it was like, you know, for stupid capitalism or corrupt politicians, for, you know, blah, 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 Nazis and so forth and so on. This time it's literally for Israel. Now you still see stupid white people who are in the military. They're doing these TikTok videos where they, you know, the music, like proud military music is playing in the background, and they put on their jacket with the medals. And I'm going like, you people you're like incurable. You're just idiots. But you know, I have to say, I don't know if they're the majority right now. The majority, regardless of race, I don't think wants this war. This is going to be a much more unpopular war.
No, I mean, just speaking from what I see, the American population is so disillusioned with everything that the idea of another war is just it enrages them. They have no use
Yes,
for it.
especially because it was this guy who said he would
The
stop
pro
all
peace
these,
ticket.
you know, the pro peace tickets, these foreign adventures is particularly in the Middle East. He would stop the forever wars, right? So if he did that, the potential for a civil war is pretty high. But I think, you know, you and I were talking off air. He could be deleted. He might be deleted, and his health looks bad.
Yeah, I'm not saying that there would be any attempts against him, but I do think, and I'm not wishing this upon anyone, just out of basic principle. I think there's a real possibility he might succumb to his health. I'm saying that as somebody with no medical experience, no medical certification, but I do not think he is a man in good health, and I think it could come to affect him in the near future.
Yeah. Well, he will be turning 80 soon.
A couple months from now, yeah.
And it's the same reason I did say it mirrors Ukraine in that like for Europe to really change the situation in Ukraine, right? They would have to institute a draft and just go to war with Russia.
Well, I'll tell you something Ukraine did teach me
Like it would
about.
be a trickle of forces. It wouldn't be just mercenaries. They would have to increase it. Russia would be aware of it. Um, Europe would have to hope that Russia doesn't retaliate in some severe way, et cetera, et cetera. But Europe is not ready for that. Europe is not going to have a like they're not going to have a war with Russia. And I think like selling the war with Russia is much easier than selling the war with Iran.
Oh yeah, Europeans unfortunately have been so primed for this for decades that you could much easier get them to activate on that than you can the Western world to
You
activate on
could,
their
but
own.
I still think they won't do it.
No, they won't. I think it's out of the cards.
Because the same kind of disillusionment and unhappiness with their own elites and the state of their countries, and that's been the reoccurring theme on this show, for the last 6 7 years. That is, demographics change. You're not going to have the netizens of these countries saying, "Yeah, I'm going to fight for this," because they know they've effectively have lost their country, and going fighting some other country like isn't going to bring it back.
I will say I agree with everything you just said, and I've oftentimes said the same myself. But many wrong predictions I have made before have been assuming too much rationality on the part of the involved actors.
Right, right. But I'm just saying,
No, I agree, but
even if several European countries decide to institute the draft, we can't presume that there would be no consequences for them to do that on a domestic level in their own in their own country.
oh yeah, there would be. And I do have to say, I think if it is going to happen, which I don't think is going to happen given what we see right now, you are seeing gradual push towards this, such as reintroducing 1 year or 2 year conscription terms for just the general citizenry. And that you could see a scenario, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I could see a timeline where they reintroduce that, get the population used to the idea of, well, yeah, conscription is just what we do. It's just what we have our
Yeah,
young men do. And then implement the war on that basis.
yeah,
And like, because I know France was floating the idea, I don't know if they actually ever fully implemented it, but it's something that once again, if they wanted that to work, they should have started years ago, and that time is not on their side, and also the demographic questions in their countries. How many of these Algerians in France or Turks in Germany are going to feel even the civic duty to serve even in a peacetime conscription?
right.
They're not. It's just the
They're
simple
not.
answer.
Yeah,
One other thing I think we have to consider, and this is a little more far fetched, but we have seen the American military do this in smaller scale wars. They could open up the recruitment funnels in Latin America and elsewhere where you fight for citizenship. And that did work for Iraq and Afghanistan being much smaller wars.
and the U.S. during the Civil War.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's talk about all the Irish and German mercenaries. That was, I mean, it's a thoroughfare throughout American history. And while I do think there's merit to the idea on principle that you shed blood for a nation, you become part of it, on a mass scale, we see what that does to empires. I know Rome is the most infamous example, but there's countless examples you could point to.
Yeah,
And point being is, even in America, I don't think you're going to get the peacetime conscription. It's just not. We don't have the civic institutions to support that, and even if we were still that 90% white Protestant country, that still was not part of the American tradition going back to even the colonial days. In some places in Europe, I think you could more easily sell that case because it is part of the tradition, especially if you give it a long enough time frame for the people to get used to it, boil the frog, if you will. But like I said, the time to do that was 20 years ago, where you had to have a generation or two get used to this idea and accept it as just part of life before jumping into it. There's a reason why Russia can still do this is because the conscription system never really went away. And I know there's been some moves around it, but ultimately it's just been a fact of life in Russia since the early modern period, as it was in most European states. Has its merits, has its downsides. I'm not going to litigate those all right now. But once you abolish that tradition, it is very difficult to rebuild it.
yeah. I mean, the other thing, every country is different. The thing with Russia is it does not have, particularly where populations are in the highest numbers, it does not have any natural defenses. It does not have oceans or a sea around it. It's flat. It's relatively easy. The reason Russia can have this is because it has arguably the bravest men in the world. They're just, they only have it because they're willing to fight and die for it.
Oh, I agree, and that because of their historical situation, largely down to geography, as you were saying, it has become necessary for survival because you're flanked on the west by European powers that, in the cases of just in recent history, Napoleon or Hitler can unite under one banner and march on Russia. You have the Islamic world to the south. Even though relations are good, you still have China to the far east, which, in a very hypothetical scenario that I don't think is going to happen anytime soon, you could have conflict there. But it is one of those things where if you're going to maintain a state like Russia, you need people who are willing to, and let's be honest, overwhelmingly men who are willing to stand in that breach, both figuratively and literally.
Yeah.
Now, one last aspect I think we can round the show out. We're almost at the 2 hour mark. Is the question of whether or not the deep state, quote unquote, wanted this war, and is Trump off the reservation serving the Zionist interest vis-a-vis the deep state?
I'm so glad you brought this up.
Because I can see the argument for it, but I'm not fully convinced.
I don't know. I think there's I think there is a faction that did not want this war, and it's a pretty sizable one.
In a way, I would call them the Brzezinskyites, where it's the people who want to squeeze out Russia before doing anything else.
Right.
And
Like like the maybe the only channel that I subscribe to on YouTube is the BBC, not because I'm Canadian. Not because I like the BBC. I literally downvote every video whether I like it or not.
that still boosts them in the algorithm.
Yeah, damn it. I'm too emotional. And you know what I mean? But when I see Ben Hodges being interviewed, and now he's diplomatic to a certain degree, although you could see him in real life getting really pissed off. In any case, Ben Hodges, who's like rah, destroy Russia, we have to do this, etc., etc. He's very quick to point out that this war has no strategy, that it should never have been started, that it's a great mistake. And you have other British personalities that political personalities who don't even think Britain should be involved. Now, of course, Trump is like rage quit with the whole the Diego Chavez Islands, and well, we don't need them anymore. Of course, Spain is not playing ball. They're not going to. But Croatia is another country that has refused to allow its bases to be used by America.
You know, a country that did allow it though,
Mm.
Romania.
Of course, Romania.
And
Oh.
yeah, I mean that goes back to the Georgescu question. That's why he was not allowed to win.
Yes, that's absolutely, and also what Cosman likes to say: when the pigs are quiet, they're eating all the corn. That's what Romanians are. He's a Romanian saying this about Romanians. I know them.
I have to say, with all due respect to Romania, I've met a number of Romanians I like. I've been to Romania ever so briefly. The more
Yeah.
time goes on, the more I think that the Hungarians should just march into Transylvania again.
You know what the funny thing is about Romanians is like they speak a totally different language. I can't understand it. I mean, I know it's Latin, so I'm not being completely honest, but I do understand some words. However, like they are this kind of people where like I have a sense that we belong to a larger group. It's kind of funny that way.
Yeah, it's the same genetic continuum, just divorced from the linguistics.
I think so. I think like I
And you
think
see,
that
funny enough, going back to Iran, you see this: the Iranian Azeris are largely an Indo-European stock, similar to the Persians, but speak a Turkic language.
yes.
And
Absolutely.
you get these examples all the time. The Hungarians are also part of that same continuum. They just speak an Ugric language.
Yeah, so we don't drift from the initial point that you were making.
You're
So
right. I almost fell into the trap.
I know. I think Trump knew what the hazard was. I'm not so sure the Epstein files, like if that would make that much of a difference. He's such an idiot in this regard
Well,
that,
let me
like,
just
I
put
don't
it
know if
this way:
that's.
in a macro sense, the Epstein files are responsible for this war. In the micro sense, as in the files themselves, are not responsible for this war.
Yes, that's beautifully put. So it's just that I'm seeing the same kind of hesitancy that I saw during the second Iraq war, where the certain countries just did not go along with this. And I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I know it's going to be a much harder war, that America has less resources to fight than Iraq. But I'm of the opinion that, Netanyahu got his war because America is owned by them.
Yeah, there's really no other way to put that. And I know that you were talking somewhat to the point where Brian Berletic insists on Israel being a node of the American empire, not vice versa. And I do want to say, in that regard, in relation to the deep state American strategy in Israel, well, you look at this, if this were purely an American imperial war, and I agree, if Israel did not exist, if we still had the ruling class of the 1930s, 40s, or 50s, just the WASP elite, they would have imperial interests. They would want to be the inheritors of the British Empire. I do not deny that. But point being is, I think they'd be more pragmatic. They wouldn't want to start a war in the Persian Gulf that would threaten their assets on the Arabian Peninsula for the sake of Israel, and that Israel would be leashed because of that. And that even down to, say, more of the Brzezinski faction I was talking about before, where you saw this with Obama and the Iran deal, where they told the Israelis to shut up because we're going to sign a deal that's going to secure our position in the region, and we're going to neutralize Iran. I don't care how much you piss and moan about it. This is actually to your benefit, so you should be working with us.
Mm.
But when you see this overt military action against Iran, when it comes to even imperial politics, there's no benefit to it because you're gambling the empire's entire position on one war. When you could maintain the containment strategy as far as the empire is concerned, pursue the JCPOA route, which I think was probably the most successful as far as the American empire was concerned. But they chose to bring their entire available arsenal to bear against the Iranians for no tangible benefits to the empire, but in the slim hope it might improve Israel's position in the region.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's not like, we shouldn't say that the disagreement it has nothing to do with any sense of altruism
Oh,
or
of course not.
international law. It is, strictly speaking,
Strategic.
strategic. This should not have happened because the consequences will be bad for America, and therefore also bad for Europe and for Britain.
Well, I think I made this joke when this first started, where you were talking about this, and I said, well, the Democrats would be like, well, unlike those barbaric Republicans, us sophisticated Democrats think we should have nuked Moscow instead. And that's
Right,
what
right, right.
that's the foreign policy
Yes,
disagreement in
yes,
effect.
yes. Yep.
But I mean, I hate to be so flippant about a situation that is very deadly for, at this point, frankly, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. But it will be interesting to see the outcomes of this, and I say that with a great deal of apprehension because I think the situation could get dangerous on a global scale very quick. So far, in a roundabout way, we have been somewhat fortunate. It has been contained to the region, and that this has not spilled over in any significant sense. But this is a powder keg, and I don't want to make any grandiose predictions. And I think that the way states interface with each other and the way that militaries are set up today, the idea of a world war in the sense of World War One and World War Two isn't exactly going to happen. But we
Hmm.
are in dangerous territory where we could see a global conflict, as it were. Maybe not necessarily what one would consider World War Three in the traditional sense or the conventional sense, but we could very well find ourselves in a situation where the world becomes a very dangerous place, not in the sense that it already is, but in the sense between open, flagrant interstate conflict with the complete degradation of any diplomatic norms that we discussed last episode that have been carefully whittled away by really just in the past few years. And I look at the strikes on the embassies the Iranians are doing. That started with the Israeli strikes on the embassies in 2024 in Syria against Iran. So we're seeing a return to, even though it's much more advanced technologically, the kind of warfare we've probably not seen in over 1,000 years, if not longer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And yeah, I try not to doom and gloom, despite being such a pessimist, too much, especially towards the end of the episode. But it is a real concern that these things do spiral out of control. And I would say, in a converse way, one of the biggest hopes we have for kind of a global stabilization right now, if that's the way you want to put it, is a Russian victory in Ukraine, which leads to the ability of Russia and China to stabilize this situation and to establish some sort of. Now, I know this is all pretty far fetched, but establish some sort of even uneasy detente between the great powers again. In which case, no, the situation is not going to be solved, but I think we can probably all learn that just over time, a lot of matters of politics, geopolitics, international relations strategy is just a game of constant crisis mitigation, and that you're not going to get to that ideal scenario. But I would like some of that crisis mitigation right about now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all I had to say for this episode. If you have any closing points.
No, I can't really add anything to that. Um, no, I was gonna send you the latest Lego.
Oh, that video. I don't know how much we
Uh,
can show it. Okay.
no,
Oh,
it's not a video. It's
oh,
actually a
the
Lego
meme. Okay.
piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
remember.
mean,
I remember these from the
yeah,
Ukraine war.
maybe it'll be popular later. I don't know. It's inspired by real life.
Look, I know the Christmas season is several months away. We're not even to Easter yet, but I think, yeah, this is what's been hot on the market lately.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember one of these towards the beginning of the Ukraine war where it's just a pile of rubble up against a green screen, a little Zelensky Lego guy.
Yeah.
But on a more serious note, this is actually
Yeah.
this is what this image is based on, showing some of the damage that's actually been done in Israel. Which once again,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
were talking about the myth.
It's far worse. And their media, being, I mean, and the Associated Press is there at night, because the Iranians attack at night. But as soon as the sirens go on, the camera moves down to the street, doesn't look at the skyline anymore, etc., etc.
Somehow this looks worse than even some of the fortification villages in Ukraine. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
saying there hasn't been serious damage in Ukraine. Some of these cities have been completely flattened, don't get me wrong. But, I mean, this is what total war looks like. This is what
Yeah.
two states who are not holding back, who are only restrained by practical concerns, fighting looks like. And as brutal as the Ukrainians are, and even with the cases we discussed in Donetsk and Bryansk, that this war in Ukraine, frankly, on either side, really looks relatively tame compared to what's going on right now. And like I said, it's hard to compare the situations, but it's it's disastrous. And I have to
Hmm.
say, I don't think there's a worse part of the world for a war to break out in, because of the stuff we were talking about earlier, where you have a lot of these people under these very bizarre religious beliefs who think that one reason or another, this prophecy or that one's being filled. And even have this on, I'm not necessarily going to say the Iranian side, but the Muslim side as well. I mean, go back to some of our episodes we did with George McMillan, where they have that Black Flags of Khorasan prophecy, where these Sunni Muslims think that once we get our throughway in Iran, that's when Israel's going to collapse. And it's all these bizarre prophecies. Once we take Damascus,
It's like, why would you have to, drive through Iran to stop to in order to attack? Israel.
Yeah,
I mean,
we're your
Iran is
Sunni
the only one
brothers.
attacking Israel. Like, why don't you help them?
We're your Sunni brothers in Egypt and Jordan. What are they doing?
Yeah, it's oh wow,
What are
low
they doing in the
IQ, man.
Gulf? Yeah, it's like it is bizarre with all of that, and that, as we were saying about Sunnis being some of the greatest golems in the world, it's yeah,
Yeah,
and of course that's not universal, but I have to say when you get down to like a lot of these Wahhabist groups, the parallels between them and American evangelicals are one for one
phenomenal.
in terms of how servile they end up being to certain interests.
Yes.
We're gonna build up a multinational army on Israel's border, but we're gonna march towards Damascus instead. That happened in 2011. I mean, look, I know dynamics have changed, but I think it is important to remember, uh, in the context of the Middle East, that Hamas was on the anti-Assad side of the Syrian civil war for 10 years.
Yeah, yeah.
And like I said, I don't think that should cloud one's judgment about the situation in Israel and Palestine today, but I think in terms of historical context, we need to remember how prone a lot of these groups are to infighting, and that a lot of Israeli success is built on the fact that these people often descend into infighting.
Hmm.
But that's, I guess, the point I'll end the show out on. Just interesting historical bit there. But
Yeah.
we'll be back when we're back in a week or so, and in which case, I don't know, this war might be over. It may have been intensified. The EMP might stop the show in its tracks. Who knows? A world of possibilities out there. Most of them are not so pleasant. But until then, we'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.